Hi, I'm Tony,
I'm Patrick.
and we'd like to welcome you again today to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. We are working our way through Mitch Stoke's books, How to Be an Atheist. And we've come to chapter 15, where he asks the question, can science determine human values? Can we get values from science is what he wants us to
Right.
consider today, right?
Yeah, it didn't work well for Hume, but we're taking a look at Sam Harris's view. We looked at well-being for the last two ones, kind of covered that. Now we're kind of gonna dismantle it.
Yeah,
in this one.
yeah, good.
Well, we meaning him, and then
right.
us taking credit for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he starts off this chapter with what he calls the is-ought distinction. Now, this is kind of a famous deal in ethics and philosophy because, and David Hume is one of the ones who talks about this a lot in his writing. So our good friend Hume, we're gonna have a go at him here.
Never get away from that guy.
Yeah. So here's a question. He says there's another way to think about what atheists are doing. They're attempting to bridge the gap between fact and value, right? Fact and value. In other words, can we get value from fact, right? So for instance, the grass is green as a fact. Well, what ought we or should we do about that?
Yeah.
Right. That's the kind of issue right there.
The rock rolls down the hill. Should the rock have rolled onto me
Yeah,
at the bottom of the hill?
Yeah. So he says in Harris' specific case, he's trying to move from descriptive physical facts about the well-being of sentient creatures to value judgments about such facts. And he believes that there's this really good reasons for thinking that this bridge not only can't be reached, right, but it's impossible for this gap to be closed. And so that's what he wants to talk about today. He wants to consider Harris's view and Harris's attempt to bridge the is-ought gap. Sometimes this is called the fact-value problem, the is-ought problem, things like that, right? How do you get from an is to an ought? Right? Yeah. That's the idea here.
I was trying to think of ways to relate this, and it's probably not the best way because I don't think too many people have seen this movie, but there's a movie called Pi, P-I, based on the number, and it's about a mathematician trying to find a pattern within pi that then unlocks kind of the secrets in the universe. So able to predict the stock market, able to determine how people will act. So trying to find that scientific claim or that scientific value that will then provide you the determination that people will make choices about. And so he unlocks this kind of super mathematical scheme within pi and is able to kind of become superhuman in his mindset and then unlocks. I mean, it's really a really interesting movie. It's from the same guy that does Requiem for a Dream. So again, trippy movies. This guy does.
Yeah.
So if you want something that's again science fiction, here we're going to see if it's more fiction than science.
Yeah. So Harris's attempt might be more fiction than science here, right?
He at least tries. Like he understands that there is a need for. All right, morality. How do we deal with it? And he's going to put himself, at the tip of the sword against Hume, which is a scary thing to do for philosophers.
So let's look at what Hume had to say. Now, Hume actually called this is-ought issue a fallacy because he argued that you can't do this, right? Hume applied science to ethics. We found when he did that, we found two things, right? For one thing, he found that facts about the physical world. So the first thing when Hume says he applies science to ethics, that we can find facts, right? He found facts about the physical world. And then Hume also found sentiments or feelings toward these facts, right? So, here is a person killing somebody, right? That's the fact. And Hume says, okay, as an empiricist, as a person who just looks at, my perceptions and my sense perceptions and that sort of thing, that's all I have to go on. What do I see when the person kills somebody? Well, I see somebody killing somebody.
Right.
I don't see murder. I don't see wrong.
Right.
Right?
So murder, not in the sense of a legal description, right? It's has a connotation that there is a ethical claim behind that. So murder is the unjust killing of somebody.
Right, right.
Well, okay, you have a spy, he takes out another spy. Was it murder? Well, it depends on which government says it's,
Yeah, yeah.
murder
So,
or not,
yeah,
and what laws are in place.
exactly.
But there seems to be distinctions made within general society of well, no, spies do murder each other, and there are things like assassinations. You don't call the taking out of a head of a state a political ploy.
Yeah.
It seems to be more than that.
So what Hume wants to say is we make this observation of the fact.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see any good, bad, or what evil, that sort of thing.
Right.
We just don't see it. And so what we do is we kind of feel it. That's what Hume says, right?
Mm-hmm.
He says Hume found that sentiments or feelings toward these facts is what we do, right?
Yeah.
For example, they are repulsive and wrong. But again, feelings, as Mitch Stoke says here, are paltry things to base something as important as, morality on. So Hume says we never observe that murder is wrong. We only feel that it is. So that's the Hume's analysis with regard to ethics, right? We can't make these observations. We do make these observations, but we never observe wrong. That comes from our feeling. Mm-hmm. And so Hume is suggesting then that it's not a good, valid, logical move to move from a fact to a value when all we have is a feeling.
Right. Yeah. You watch Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and you're rooting for every time that he murders somebody. That's your feeling. But if you were to see that same type of situation play out in the real world, maybe even from the actual Arnold Schwarzenegger, you would have a completely different reaction. And so, it is understanding that, yes, you can distinguish between a real murder and a murder on screen, but you don't. There's no. Well, you've just inputted the same input, so why not have the same output between seeing over the top death scene versus someone a chalk outline right there on the street in front of your house.
Yeah. So Hume famously marveled. He says that philosophers' effortless leaps over the is-ought gap. Oughts would arise from nowhere, out of nothing. Hume argued, right? Like magic. He says, I'm surprised, this is a quote from Hume, I'm surprised to find that instead of the usual compilations of propositions, is and is not, I meet with proposition that is not connected with an ought or an ought not. So there was no sign of the source of the mysterious oughts, neither observations nor inferences, and this is because Hume said, oughts cannot appear from physical facts or by way of inference from those facts. So morality cannot be grounded in sense perception or reason, no matter how tempting it is, right? All Hume said is all we have is, I don't like it, I don't feel good about that, right? This came to be known as emotivism in ethics, right?
Well, and we saw in chapters way back that Hume doesn't want to engage in philosophy, but all these oughts and ought nots seems very philosophical to me.
Yeah.
So essentially, what he's saying is that he'll talk to people about these actions that come about, and people want to ground their as we covered before, their really strong feelings on murder is wrong, rape is wrong, all these things that we have this intense feeling for, and so what they're saying is here you have an action and you just ought not to do it because it violates somebody's personal space, whatever it might be. But he's saying there's no preceding argumentation for that.
Yeah. So we have a fact, and he's suggesting we can't go from a fact to a value. We can't go from the fact that this person is murdered or killed to that was wrong. That's what Hume is saying.
Right.
That doesn't work. That's not a logical move.
Right. That's
we don't observe wrong.
Right.
We
that's
just
grounded in a
fact.
scientific reality of you check off these boxes under the microscope and you've measured the wrongness of it. You have this feeling like, oh, I feel it's wrong, but aren't we just getting then into personal preferences again? Yeah.
So now he wants to cover Harris's, because Harris wants to
Right,
challenge this.
right, yeah. So Harris, he's standing against what, like 200 years of
Yeah. Hume wrote in
of Hume and
yeah.
of those people that came about and wiped philosophy and theology off the map.
So I remember Hume's. I remember Hume's the date of his death, or at least the year of his death, because it's famous 1776.
Oh, that might something else might have happened. Around
Yeah.
Interesting. So Harris is gonna actually complain about our hero of Hume. So Sam Harris says that that he insists that notions that we ought to do or value can be justified only in terms of other oughts, never in terms of facts about the way the world is. After all, in a world of physics and chemistry, how could things like moral obligations or values really exist? How could it be objectively true, for instance, that we ought to be kind to children? So Harris' complaint is that modern-day moral skeptics merely defer to Hume's authority. So, Hume said this, and he goes, "Well, why are we going based off Hume?" So he's got a problem with Hume's, logic here, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but he really doesn't. And I mean, okay, so fine. You are deferring to Hume. That therefore you're wrong.
Right.
What kind of argument is that?
Yeah.
Right?
We defer to the Bible, therefore you're wrong. I mean, they wouldn't take that type of argumentation. So he's saying, why should he? But unfortunately, Sam Harris offers no argument against Hume.
Yeah.
He merely warns us that opponents of the is-ought gap are playing a dangerous game, that abject failures of compassion are enabled by this intellectual tolerance of moral difference. Apparently, tolerance of moral difference is going too far. Why is that the case? Well, he doesn't really come up with anything.
He doesn't so in order to have a good argument, you have to have a conclusion, right? And his conclusion is Hume is wrong, or the is-ought gap or fallacy is wrong.
Right.
And then you have to have some reasons to believe that conclusion is true. And he really doesn't give us good reasons here, right?
He says you shouldn't appeal to authority. Okay, fine, great, sure. But then also people who want to be grounded in what Hume was talking about are playing this dangerous game of throwing out any moral claims of why murder is wrong. And that's exactly the point that we're trying to make here. Is that's the case.
Yeah, he's almost begging the question. Yeah. Why is it wrong?
Right.
Why is Hume wrong is what the question is.
Right.
Well, because he's wrong. I mean, because you shouldn't appeal to his authority. Okay, why not? Mm-hmm. Right.
Harris seems to say that we should disagree with Hume merely because an is-ought gap would have unwelcome consequences, namely that we can't get authoritative oughts from scientific facts.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't like the consequences, therefore he's wrong?
Right.
I don't like the, he's wrong because I don't like the consequences? I mean,
Right. It's why the new atheists don't really have a good explanation for this intense sense of morality, because to throw it all out, it would be consistent, but then you just have people again ask the question, it's not why be good, why be bad, it's why do anything at all. It's just because you want to. It's what we covered a couple chapters back. Dostoevsky's we'll all be monsters. Well, not only will you not all be monsters, you can't really judge anything based on anything. Yeah.
What would a monster be if it doesn't exist? There is no monster. Yeah. It's just people acting, out, whatever. Yeah.
Is Frankenstein the monster? Or is he the hero? Is Frankenstein's monster the monster or the hero? I should say. You could ask Frankenstein as well.
Yeah.
Harris doesn't give an argument against Hume. Neither has he given us reason to think that science could underwrite morality by deriving oughts from physical facts about brain states, or by well-being, or by whatever other source that we're trying to derive them from. He wants to measure this well-beingness, but it seems like we have a problem there.
He almost does exactly what Hume says we do with regard to ethics. He doesn't like it, right? He doesn't. He doesn't feel good about it, right?
It's the ick factor.
And therefore, it's got to be something wrong with it.
Right.
I don't like the consequences, so it has to be something wrong with it.
Yeah.
This last section, this is a relatively short chapter,
It's
right?
because we're teeing off for probably another 2-part episode that's really is going to be 2, maybe 3 parts.
Yeah, we're going to get an opportunity to see Stoke's examination of values and where he believes it comes from, right? So that'll be next time. So make sure you look at next time's episode because you'll get a chance to see where Stokes is coming from. So this last portion here, he says, what ought we to value? And he says, notice something. Science can't tell us to value the well-being of sentient creatures in the first place. We've come to science already valuing that, right? Even if science can tell us which things will result of an increase in well-being, it can't tell us we ought to value well-being.
Right.
This will increase in well-being. Okay, fine. But what does that tell us about what we ought to do, right?
Right.
Even our own. So he says, since information about the consequences of our action does not tell us, this is Peter Singer he's quoting here.
Our friend Peter Singer wants to give rights to animals and put monkeys on trials for killing each other.
Since information about the consequences of our action does not tell us which consequences to value, Singer tells us, but only which actions will or will not bring about the consequences we do value, most ethical theories simply incorporate new information about the consequences of our actions into our ethical decisions. So again, Singer is agreeing here, right? Science cannot tell us what to value.
Yeah. So what he in general is saying is that science can tell you all the parts of what the gun does, the spring, the gunpowder, the
What
rifling,
when the bullet hits you, where it goes, how
right.
it ricochets through the body.
Yeah. But it doesn't tell you, should you pull the trigger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Science can't determine our antecedent values of well-being, much less anybody else's, right?
Right. Yeah. Which was Harris's entire point in the last 2 parts that we did is he's trying to establish well-being because you can measure it, but who cares about establishing other well-being? I can't even establish my own of what should the values be? There's the other, what ought they be?
Yeah, right. So science alone cannot tell us that well-being is a moral property or that well-being is simply a matter of brain states. We saw that this depends largely on issues of worldviews, which would include our antecedent views about morality. In other words, our values come from, from how we view the world, our worldview, right? Our presuppositions about the world, our assumptions about the world, that sort of thing. That's where our values come from.
Interesting.
Right? People are valuers. Persons are valuers. He says, what then is the source of morality? And here's what I was just mentioning. As we'll argue in the next chapter, an important sense of the source of morality is us. We are the source of morality, or people, or persons. We value morality, right? What we value morality is up to us, not science. So what we value morally is dependent on us, is what he's suggesting here, right? It's dependent on persons. Persons value. Science doesn't value. The physical empty space doesn't value. Persons value, right? That's what he's trying to say. We choose, right, what we determine to value. We do not find our ethical premises in our biological nature or under cabbages.
So again, what he's saying here is not. He probably isn't going to make the case that a person values something and therefore it's true.
Right.
It's trying to make the point that where do values come from? They come from people valuing things.
Yeah.
And not to belabor the point here, but in the next portion, he really covers it well.
Yeah, good. So it's possible for science, he tells us, to influence our moral actions by telling us that certain actions will result in certain consequences, right? So science can tell us what the consequences can be, to a certain extent. And science might also tell against fundamental moral principles because suppose he says, I think that science shows that naturalism is true. A commitment to consistency or rationalism might force me to further conclude that there are no human independent moral standards, right? And notice significantly he says that the fact that we value rationality is itself not something that science can dictate, right? So again, we are valuers, and science is not, and it cannot tell us, right, what to value. It can tell us the consequences if we do something or if we value something and move toward it, but it can't say this is what you ought to do. That's not science's job. Oftentimes folks think, science is the pillar of truth, right?
Yeah.
But science can only do, science is like a hammer. And, it can only hit nails, right? There are certain things that hammers can do, and you need other tools for other things. And so valuing is not a nail for science, right?
Right.
It's something else.
Yeah. Yeah. In things like The Matrix, God bless that movie, because, I mean, if it wasn't for The Matrix, we'd only be regulated to, Hitler analogies. But there's a point in there where, Neo gets told, you have all these people surrounding you, and they're all plugged in the Matrix. They're all asleep, and you're the one that's awake. And if they get in your way, unfortunately, you have to kill them because you're trying to set them free. Well, I mean, that's a huge ethical dilemma that the movie kind of just glances over. Like, yes, to preserve you, the chosen one, okay, sure, but that's how everyone operates who's free. And so what they don't discuss is, this understanding of, well, it's not just that these are computer simulations or computer code, that's what the agents are for, but that individual people that don't take on this agent form are real people, and you're being told, it's best just to take them out because they could be utilized by the programming or anything like that. And so there's a huge ethical dilemma in there where it's like, okay, ought I kill, the security guard, the poor security guard who's always going to get killed because he's trying to stop me from ending the Matrix to save everybody else. There's your utilitarian argumentation too.
Right.
And so all the computer code is there scientifically, but whether or not you should pull the trigger and take out that individual person that's in the pod next to you, should you do that? Well, I mean, where does that value come from? Neo kind of just takes orders from at that point, but it's an interesting question. I'm sure we could probably do 16 episodes on The Matrix as well.
So he says, next chapter, he's going to finally argue for what he thinks is the morality's foundation. And he tells us, he tips his hand here, morality's foundation is persons, right? That is, moral value is nothing more than personal value, since all value is personal. And he says, if I'm right about this, then we'll have more reason to think that science could never determine human values, as well as even more reason to doubt Harris's account of morality. Right? So that's what he's going to get to. He's going to argue that that's the source of values. The source of values is persons, not science. Science cannot get us there. So what we've seen here is there's this is-ought gap. Right? Hume called it a fallacy, trying to move from what is the case than to tell us what we should do about it. Hume said we can't make that move. That's a logical fallacy. And then we saw that Harris attempts to do that, but he really doesn't give us a good argument for it. He just doesn't like what Hume says, and he says it results in bad consequences. But okay, fine, that's
Sure.
And so then he ends here by saying that really we choose values. Value is based on what persons choose, and so he's going to pursue that the next chapter and try to help us to work through that.
And I think too, he'll cover, and at least we'll cover too, kind of the question arises of postmodernism. Well, okay, if you have us as the valuers, what happens when two competing values coincide? Coincide with each other. That's just what's true for you is true for me. But again, if I think one thing's murder and you think the other thing is picking daisies, we're coming into clash here, and one of us is going to be able to survive.
He's going to have to work us through that. Right?
Yeah,
that relativism that comes as a result of
that seems to be the case. And it's a good chapter, so we'll take our time with it because it's one of the longer ones. But I think it's kind of his central point that he is built up to this, and then also he's going to launch from making his case for, why have an objective lawgiver as a necessary consequence.
So if you enjoy our channel and what we're doing here, and you're getting some things out of it, make sure you subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. It helps us. with this channel. Also, hit the likes and the bell, and so that we also release smaller clips of what we do here
on the YouTube channel. Yeah,
on the YouTube channel. And so if you subscribe, you'll have access to those that you'll know when those are coming out as well. So please do that. That'll help our channel.
We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Take care.